Well, good morning. Wow, guys, thank you for leading us in worship like that. What an amazing set. And man, it sounded great, but it was just really awesome. It was what I felt like my heart wanted to express to him this morning. Beautiful. Thank you for doing that and for leading us that way. Hey, listen, I want to say thank you for asking and for praying for Mima. I know you guys have all been asking and talking and thinking and praying for her, and she really appreciates it. She wants me to say thank you to you this morning. So she's still in the hospital this morning. She has blood clots, and she is in congestive heart failure. And so they were doing tests this morning on our way here to church super early, and they are coming up with a long-term treatment plan of different medications and things that she'll be having to deal with over the next forever. So hopefully they'll get done with all that, come up with a plan, communicate that plan, document it, and send her home today. We're hoping she comes home today, maybe tomorrow, and I hope she'll be back with us soon. So thank you for praying for her, and please keep praying for her as she goes through all this stuff. Also, I want to say that tonight is my last of the crash course that I'm doing. It's the last one. We were going to be 4 weeks long. Tonight's the fifth one. Just like in our Mark study, it's just going to be longer than you thought. So tonight is the final one. And I just want to invite you to come tonight at 6 o'clock to my crash course. Because tonight we're kind of answering that question, why did God even create the universe and all of us in the first place? What is God's motive behind all of this, and what does he hope to get out of it all? So, the question is, did God create the universe and then it all just fell apart? It all just broke right after he created it, and is God really that incompetent? So we're going to be looking at that question and seeing what the reality is about who God is and what he's up to. So I hope that you'll come tonight at 6 o'clock for the last of my classes. You won't have to come back. I won't be asking you to come back the next week because there's not one. This is the last one tonight. All right. Good? Are we good? How you doing? You with me? Good to see you this morning, Sean. How you doing? I'm doing good. Thanks, man. It's good to see you. So we're continuing our study in the book of Mark, studying this person, Jesus Christ, who is like no other. We're in Mark 14, and today we're going to re-look at the same passage that we looked at last Sunday. We're going to start there, and today I'm going to preach the sermon that I was scheduled to preach last week. So last week I decided to just take the first two verses and just focus on those two. Today we're going to look at the rest of the 11 verses in this passage in Mark chapter 14. So let's just look at the first two verses again, the ones we looked at last week. It's verse 1 and 2 of chapter 14. It was now 2 days before the Passover and the feast of unleavened bread. And the chief priests and the scribes were seeking how to arrest him by stealth and kill him. For they said, not during the feast, lest there be an uproar from the people. Okay, so we looked at that part last week. And by the way, hey, we kind of had a little emergency in my family with Meemaw going to the hospital and everything this week. So if I'm not quite as prepared as usual, you'll forgive me this week, won't you? Will you work with me a little bit on that? I may stumble and stammer through it a little bit, and I hope you'll be giving me a little grace. So we looked at these first two verses last week, and I think Mark's trying to show us something here. Because here, Mark is, as he moves to verse 3, he's not just simply narrating the story chronologically. Mark is setting up a situation for us to look at here. Remember, here in verse 2, Mark says it's 2 days before the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. 2 days before. That means it's Tuesday evening as the leaders are trying to conspire to kill Jesus. And then right after this sentence in verse 2, he jumps right into a different story. That's what Mark always does. He's always jumping from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next. The thing about this next story is this next story does not take place on Tuesday evening. Instead, right here, Mark gives us a flashback to an event that took place several days earlier on Saturday. So he gives us 2 verses of Tuesday night. He flashes back to a story on Saturday. And then as soon as that story's over, he jumps right back to Tuesday night again. In other words, Mark is making a sandwich. Right? He's done this before. Remember the story of the temple? And Mark was showing us what Jesus was doing in the temple by showing us the story of the fig tree. Right? I mean, if you just read the temple, Jesus in the temple, you think that Jesus is cleansing the temple. But if you understand in the context that Mark gives you of the fig tree, you see that Jesus is not really cleansing. What's he doing? You can say it. Come on. You can. Cursing. He's cursing the temple. So you have to read the context, and Mark is building a temple sandwich with the fig tree. And that's what he's doing here, is he's trying to show us something with another little sandwich. Mark here in this sandwich is contrasting 2 very different attitudes, 2 very different approaches to Jesus. And I think that as we read these 2 stories, we're going to find ourselves in one approach or the other. I think we're going to identify ourselves either with the outside of the sandwich or with the inside of the sandwich. And so let's look really closely at the context here, and let's look at what Mark is showing us in this sandwich. In this final week, Mark is contrasting allies and enemies of Jesus. In other words, this is the first blank on your page. Mark is showing us that it's time to choose sides. It's the final week. We're now well into the final week before the cross, and it's time to choose sides. Listen to me, men and women. The time is now short. Today, the time is short. And you may have noticed in our culture, everything is polarizing. The extreme left, the extreme right and wrong, they are farther apart now, it seems like, that they ever were pre-COVID. Remember, it seems like just 6 or 8 years ago, the temperature in our nation, it wasn't good, but it wasn't anywhere near what it is now. You know, the things that seem to be wrong in our culture, 6 or 8 years ago are really different things than they are now. The things that seemed to be wrong just seemed like they were off, not right, but now they're way out there in left field. There's a polarization clearly going on here, and the time is short, and it's time to choose sides. Imagine yourself being a disciple with Jesus on Saturday night. You've been there with him throughout his ministry. You've seen all of the miracles, right? You've seen the sick made well, the blind given sight. You've seen the lame walk again. Lepers have been cleansed. You've heard the shrieks of the demons as they are expelled from their unwilling hosts. You saw the crowd fed. You watched Jesus walk across the water and speak so that the storm just stopped. You know what you know about Jesus, right? I mean, you're convinced. You've seen it with your eyes. You've literally tasted it. You've literally held on to it. You know what you know about Jesus. Peter himself confessed it out loud at Caesarea Philippi when Jesus said, "Who do people say that I am, and who do you say that I am?" And Peter said, "You are him. You're the Messiah. You're the sent one from God. You're the one we've been waiting for. You're the one who is going to set all of this right. You know what you know about Jesus. And now it's Saturday night. His popularity is at its absolute peak. Everyone knows and respects Jesus. Everyone wants to be near him. It's Saturday night. A whole crowd, a massive crowd of people have traveled with Jesus all the way from Galilee and all the way up into the hills surrounding Jerusalem. And tomorrow morning, on Sunday morning, tomorrow morning is the day that Jesus, the Messiah, will enter into his holy city. Tomorrow morning is the morning that he will finally reveal himself. I know what I know about Jesus, but tomorrow everybody's going to know the truth about Jesus. He is going to come into the city, and the leaders will see him and recognize him. The people will see him and recognize him, and everything is going to change. It's Saturday night, and tomorrow morning is the big day. This is it. So the night before, it's Saturday night. It's time to rest and recuperate from a long, hot, difficult journey. They've come that last day all the way from the Jordan River area in the southern part of the country. They've come through Jericho. It's all really, really flat, but it's hot. It's ridiculous hot. And then they hit the mountains, and they have to start traveling up toward Jerusalem. And by the time they get up into the hills near the city, it's late, and it's time to rest, get washed up and clean. It's time to have dinner. So they're relaxing at the home of their biggest contributors, the people who are supporting their ministry the most. They're at Bethany, right across from Jerusalem. Bethany on the mount, or directly adjacent to the Mount of Olives, and they're looking across at Jerusalem. And here's that next sentence. On Saturday night, while he was at Bethany in the house of Simon the leper, as he was reclining at table, a woman came with an alabaster flask of ointment of pure nard, very costly. And she broke the flask and she poured it over his head. Now, I want to be really clear here. You know this story, but don't be confused. There's actually two different stories of two different women that come and do a kind of similar thing. None of the other circumstances of the story are the same, except for the breaking of a bottle and an anointing of Jesus. The first story occurred really early in Jesus' ministry. Mark doesn't record it for us. We only know about it because of Luke. And it's a story of a prostitute who comes to Jesus. She recognizes who he is. He's at a table, and he's sitting like this at the table. And so she comes up behind him, and she anoints his feet with oil, and she wipes the oil with her hair on his feet. It's a beautiful picture, but that's not the same exact picture. In this story, we're in the final week. It's Saturday night. It's right before Jesus enters Jerusalem. And I want to talk about this picture. First of all, I want to talk about the alabaster jar. Okay, so we know that alabaster jars were not common. In your household, there would have been, in that day and time, there would have been plenty of clay jars. You might have had 1 or 2 or 3 or 6 or 8 or 10. You might have had a bunch of those clay jars. Clay jars are common. They're all over the place. At home, I meant to bring them this morning. I forgot. I've got some clay jar handles that that date back to the time of Christ from that part of the world, and they're that's all that's left of the jar is the handle, because it's the densest part, and the rest of it has long since disintegrated. So clay pots were common, clay jars were common, but alabaster jars, they were not. Alabaster jars, they were rare. They were not for using every day. They were for storing something precious. They were something unique. These are two examples of alabaster jars. Neither of these two are like the one that is in this story. They're made of the same thing. The one in the story was probably shaped more like this one, except it probably had handles on the side because it was this is a small one. The one that we're looking at in this story was a larger one, because the one in this story is an alabaster jar full of nard. Yeah, nard. I didn't know what that was either. Nard, it turns out, is a really super expensive commodity. It is an oil that is pressed from the root of a unique flowering plant high up in the Himalayas. It's produced there and then exported all around the known world. At the time, it was very rare and extremely expensive. It smelled beautiful, and it was used on very rare occasions. It wasn't used for perfume so that you would just smell good. It was used for religious rituals. It was used for preparing the dead, and it was used for really rare occurrences. The Gospels tell us that this perfume was so expensive, it was worth maybe a year's salary. This was some heavy-duty stuff. It wasn't for wearing, it was for investing in. Yeah, this represents an investment that this family had made. This could be a family heirloom, handed down from generation to generation. It could have been literally what we would see as a 401k, a place for her to park her money that's very valuable, so that when it's retirement time, you can just sell this expensive jar if anybody else will buy it, and now you got money to live on. Could be this jar could represent her future. And this alabaster jar would have not had a lid like this one appears to have. It would have been sealed. The alabaster jars would have been sealed so that there is no reuse. The way to use what's inside is to break it and then immediately use it. You don't come back and just dip and dip and dip again. You either have it sealed or you are pouring it out. And that's exactly what this woman does. This woman. Mark doesn't give us the name of this woman, but John does. John lets us know that this woman is Mary. Not Jesus' mom, Mary, but you remember the story of Mary and Martha, the two sisters of Lazarus. They live in Bethany, and they, along with Simon, were some of Jesus' largest contributors, supporting his ministry, following him all along, always about Jesus and supporting and following Jesus. So here Mary, remember Mary's the one that when he had been in the house before, Martha was busy making sure everything was taken care of. But where was Mary? She was at his feet. Martha was getting frustrated. Come on, Jesus, tell Mary to get in the kitchen and help me out. And Jesus is like, chill, Martha, chill. Mary's doing the right thing. You're not going to have me here forever. She's soaking it up. Mary's the one that wasn't sure she was ready to see Jesus face to face because he didn't come back to Bethany when her brother died. After all of this, after all the following I've done, after all the supporting I've done, after soaking it up, We sent you word and you were in the wrong Bethany. You didn't come. And so when he finally shows up several days after Lazarus has been dead, Mary won't come out and see him. Right? She comes finally begrudging, and all she can do is cry. And finally, the only words she can muster up is, if you'd have just been here, if you'd have just been here, he would not have died. But she saw what Jesus did. She stared death in the face, and Jesus conquered death. He raised her brother Lazarus from the grave. And just like the disciples, Mary had her mind made up about Jesus. She knew what she knew about Jesus. And she was completely sold out to the fact that he is the Messiah, the sent one of God. And it's her that comes and she breaks this alabaster jar in a deeply moving and symbolic act. She breaks it open. Why in the world would you want the perfume, the oil poured all over you like that? You know, I read that. I'm like, wow, what a wonderful thing. Now I got to go take a shower. You know, and the culture of the day changes. Am I right? Right? I mean, the things we say, the things we do aren't the same as the things we used to say and do. Right? Because culture changes. And in that culture and in that day, if you were to anoint someone with oil, you wouldn't use the expensive nard oil. You would use some much lesser expensive oil. You would use the everyday regular use oil, olive oil, right? And you would dab a little bit, or you would sprinkle a little bit. And as you anointed that person with oil, typically you would anoint their hands or their feet, maybe sometimes their head. In fact, kind of the higher up you go on them, the more you are indicating your respect, your adoration, your honoring of that person. It was a deeply revering act that you would do. And so it was a form of cleansing, ritual cleansing. It was a form of honoring. It was a way that you would show that you love and respect that person. But that's not what Mary did. She didn't come and sprinkle or dab. What did she do? She broke it and poured it out on him. We know from reading in John that the jar, this alabaster jar of nard, had about a pound, 16 ounces of nard. This was no little bitty perfume bottle. I mean, it was more like a gallon jug. And it says that she poured it. Some of the Gospels say that she poured it on his head, and some say that she wiped his feet. And some people claim contradiction there, because she's wiping, like the prostitute earlier, wiping his feet with her hair. I don't know how you could find contradiction. If you're breaking a pound of nard and pouring it over, there's enough to cover his entire body. Dude, she has broken and completely poured it out for him, all over him. She's saying, I'm all in. I'm all for you. There is nothing else in my life, including this gigantic investment, that is worth more to me than you. I'm going to show you the ultimate honor that I possibly can. I'm going to pour all of my wealth out on you, and then I'm going to get down to your feet, and I'm going to wipe it up with my hair. That's how much I honor you. Next blank on your page is this: Mary made a high value sacrifice. She didn't only pour out all of her wealth onto him, but she humiliated herself before him, wiping his feet with her hair. You wouldn't do that for your husband. You wouldn't do that for me. You wouldn't do that for anyone. Yet here she is, face to the floor, rubbing his feet with her hair. Why would she do this? Because for Mary, Jesus was worth it. He was worth it. Isn't this what worship is? The word worship means to ascribe worth or ascribe value to something. And that's what she's doing. She's worshiping Jesus in this super real, tangible way. It makes me ask the question, can real worship just be pretty songs and good vibes? Mary knew what she knew about Jesus, and so there was no expense too great. She poured herself out for him and humiliated because of who he was in her life. Who is he in your life? What has he done for you? Sinner, broken, enemy of God, traitor against your Creator. What has he done for you? Because I know what he should have done to you and to me, and that's to kill us. Because the wages of my sin is death. That's what I deserve. But that's not what he did for me. No, he paid the wages of sin himself. He died in my place so that I could experience life, so that I could be cleansed and forgiven, so that I could have that oil poured over me, cleansing me. Except it's not oil, it's his own blood covering my sin. That's what he does for me and for you. How can I not pour it out for him in response? Mary may not even know yet. She may not even know yet what Jesus is going to do. She likely does not understand the sacrifice that he is about to make. But here she is worshiping him on Saturday night in this real, tangible way. Mary doesn't just break a jar of perfume. She breaks out in abject worship. Is that what we do on Sunday mornings? We sing it. We were just singing it. So will I. So will I. We sing to him, I surrender all to Jesus. I surrender all. Because we've seen what he's done and we respond to him. What an amazing, profound moment this is. Mary at the feet of Jesus. You know, I think true worship is contagious. You know, I love to stand. I don't like to do worship time back in the back of the room. I like to stand up here because up here I can see you guys. I can see you guys worshiping. And some of you guys, man, I can see you're caught up in it. I mean, you got your eyes closed, your face up, and your hands, you're just reaching for them, and I can feel it. I can feel it. You know, it's not just some fake thing. Oh, here I am. You are all about it. And I like being up here because it's contagious. It rubs off on me. And when I see it in you, it just engenders a response from me as well. I think worship is contagious. I think when you see someone else genuinely worshiping, you can't help but say, yes, me too, right? I want in on that. I want what she has. I want what he has. I want to be part of that. I want to pour out to him too. I surrender all. Mary is a worship leader. And so here she breaks out in abject worship to Jesus right in front of the disciples who also know what they know about Jesus. They know they've been there, they've walked with him, they've seen it all happen. It's Saturday night, they're going to Jerusalem tomorrow. What a great time for a moment of pure worship. Their emotions are at their height, and they're ready. How will the disciples respond? Look at the next sentence, verse 4. There were some who said to themselves indignantly, why was the ointment wasted like that? For this ointment, or this perfume in other translations, could have been sold for more than 300 denarii and given to the poor. and they scolded her. What? I had to go back and read again. I had to look in the other accounts of this. Is this the Pharisees or the Pharisees at dinner with Jesus? Because it sounds like Pharisees talking. No. It's disciples talking. Doesn't seem to be all of them, but it seems like at least some of the disciples are the ones saying this. What? What? John tells us that there was one guy that kind of got them all yaying about it. You know who it was. Who was it? Judas is the one that got that conversation started. Here's this beautiful expression of abject worship, and Judas got his arms folded. What did she do that for? John also tells us in John 12 that Judas said this not because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. And having charge of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put into it. Judas had his mind made up about Jesus also. The disciples, including Judas, have seen everything Jesus has done, and Judas has made up his mind. And when she pours out that ointment, instead of breaking out into abject worship, joining Mary like he should, Judas instead sits back. Because, and this is the next blank on your page, for Judas, Jesus just wasn't worth it. He wasn't worth it. To Mary, he's worth it all. To Judas, Jesus is not worth it. For Judas, there are other things. For Judas, he's been following Jesus for 3 years now, and he feels like he's owed something for it. Judas wasn't there to worship Jesus. Judas was there to see what he could get out of Jesus. So in verse 6 of Mark 14, let's continue the story. Jesus said, "Leave her alone. Why do you trouble her? She's done a beautiful thing for me. For you always have the poor with you, and whenever you want, you can do good for them, but you will not always have me. She has done what she could. She's anointed my body beforehand for burial." I love this because Mary is there, as far as we can tell, the only woman in a testosterone-filled room. Usually, in that culture, women were only in the room with men eating dinner to serve. The women and the men outside of just your family unit, if there were multiple people gathered outside of the family, the women and the men would eat separately. And the women would always serve the men. And so here Mary has come in and interjected herself into this scene and broke out in worship. And all the testosterone started rushing, and Judas got it going. Why is she doing this? How dare she do this? This could have been used for something better than Jesus. And they scolded her. But Jesus shuts them down. I love this. I love this. Something we can really learn from Mary. Isn't just worship, but this next thing is this. Next blank on your page. Mary let Jesus fight her battle. Here she is, probably at the pinnacle of what should have been church burn. She's just absolutely given herself to Jesus, and now she's being scolded by the disciples of all people for that. But Jesus fights her battle. Jesus goes before and comes behind. When you're doing something for Jesus, when you're living your life in surrender and obedience, He is your strength and He is your shield. The enemy will do anything he can to attack you. And you know what? Often that attack will come, I'm sorry to report, it will come from other believers because church burn is real. And I'm proud of Mary because in that moment she could have started crying. She could have run out in tears. She could have pointed her finger in blame to those, but she stood her ground in that group of men, in that testosterone-filled room, and she let Jesus come right to her defense, and he did. Not only that, but look what he said about her next in verse 9. He says, truly I say to you, wherever the gospel is proclaimed in the whole world, what she has done will be told in memory of her. Jesus is saying this is the profound thing. Helping the poor is important, but what she's doing, this is it. She's done something absolutely foolish for me. This matters. This will echo. And sure enough, Jesus was right. Here we are today talking about this amazing sacrifice that she poured out. But you know what? Mary isn't the only one that we're talking about. She's not the only one that does something here that is remembered forever. Remember the first part of the sandwich? The first part of the sandwich was that the religious leaders were seeking to kill Jesus. Now it's Saturday night. But then we come to the second part of the sandwich in verse 10. Then Judas Iscariot, who was one of the 12, went to the chief priests in order to betray him to them. And when they heard it, they were glad, and they promised to give him money. And he sought an opportunity to betray his Savior. Mary is remembered for being a giver to Jesus, and Judas is only remembered for being a taker and a betrayer. In fact, I made a little list. Let's look at my list. To shorten this sermon up, I made a list. Mary is a giver, Judas is a taker. Mary valued Jesus, but Judas only valued himself. Mary was broken and poured out, but Judas only took for himself. Mary was defended by Jesus because she was all about honoring him, and Judas offended Jesus. There's a moment where Jesus calls Judas the devil. Mary is remembered for her gift, and Judas is only remembered for her betrayal, his betrayal. Men and women, it's time to choose sides. It's time to choose sides. Will you lead out in abject worship, or will you just be a Judas and be remembered for your betrayal? Here's all I know. At the end of the night, this is the last blank on your page, Judas stunk like betrayal, but Mary smelled like Jesus. It's time to choose sides. Which do you want? Which aroma do you want to carry? Let's pray together.